Let's keep this simple. I'm making axes.
Okay people, check this out. Just like this guy said, I'm going to make some axes by using broken skateboards. I picked out these skateboards that are broken right around where the inside truck holes are, where it's very common for these skateboards to break at this spot. So first, I use my D-Gripper 5000 to heat up these boards to make it easier for me to take the grip tape off. I also use 1.5 inch roller to roll the grip tape off, and I don't have to struggle with taking the grip tape off just by gripping onto the grip tape, and I actually have better control with this roller. I can then cross-cut them into different sections. To get a consistent size for these sections, I line up the inside truck holes with the hole on the miter saw fence that I have, which happens to be about 4 inches away from the blade. So here's what I have. I have 7 of the middle portions, 7 of the hardware pieces, and 7 of these nose and tails. And I'll be using just the middle portion, but you could check out my channel and see what I make with these hardware pieces and nose and the tails. Now I can move on to sanding. I have to sand these boards down to bare wood before I can laminate them. And I'm using just cheap angle grinder sanding flat discs to remove all the glue residue, finishes, stickers, and paint, and everything else. And once I'm done with sanding, I do something called the tax cut. I cut off about a 1/4 inch strip from the skateboard edges and save these strips to give it to a skate shop owner. He uses them to make plaques for his sponsors to help fund his after school program, and he really likes them since it tells a story of where these skateboards have been and what they have been through. Next, I can move on to cutting them into strips. Since these axes would be roughly about 1¼ inches in thickness, I'm cutting them at 1½ inches to give myself a little bit of room. And once all the strips have been cut, I can arrange all the strips to get the best color combination. And moving on to lamination, I use blue tape to separate each section so they won't stick together. And when I'm laminating, I dip the broken edges into the epoxy to seal it to prevent bubbles during the thick epoxy pour. And after clamping them together, I use the leftover epoxy to pour over the broken edges to make sure that I get a good seal. Now once the epoxy has cured, I could take it off the clamps and separate each handle. My original plan was to do a deep pour, but these little extra epoxy made it too thick to fit into the mold, so I had to sand it down and reseal the handle with epoxy. And this took an extra day, but this will help with the bubbles during the deep pour. And finally, once the epoxy has cured, I can put it into the mold and secure it down so it doesn't float up. I'm using TOTALBOAT Fathom epoxy, which allows you to pour up to 3 inches deep in one single pour. And if you want to save some money on TOTALBOAT products, make sure to use the link down in the description below and get a nice little discount. And I let the epoxy cure for at least a week or two before I could take it off the mold. And once I have it off the mold, I cut them down using the bandsaw and clean them up using a drum sander. Also, off camera, I had some leftover epoxy, so I ended up mixing it with the translucent pigment and filled up the mold, and that's why you're seeing a little bit of green on the handles itself. And once I have all the handle blanks cleaned up, I can start shaping it. I'm using my hammer handle as a template since I really like the shape of it and the feel of it. It also happens to be the same length. So I made a quick template using a 1/2 inch plywood so I could get a consistent shape for all these axes. I'm using the bandsaw to cut it as close to the line as possible, and then I can start shaping it using a Japanese rasp. And then I rounded over the edges using a router with a roundover bit to make it look nice and smooth. Now there were some few voids that I needed to fill up, so I'm using TOTALBOAT UV Cure Clear Resin, which is activated by a UV light. I've been using this to fill any cracks and voids, and I highly recommend it over using a CA glue. And I'm just sanding it up to 100 grit just to clean up the clear resin and any tooling marks. Moving on to fitting the axe head onto the handle, since I'm not much of an expert on axes nor this axe is going to be functional, I'll do my best to go over the general steps of fitting them into the handle. First, I mark the lines and cut off any excess using a pull saw. I can then use the rasp to remove material little by little. I make sure to check the fit by fitting the axe head in every now and then. And once the axe head fits in nicely, I work on the transition to the handle to make it look nice and smooth. and giving it a quick sand to remove any tooling marks. And I went over this really quick, but you kind of have to just try it to really understand how it works. Next, I can move on to sanding. Since I want the epoxy to be nice and shiny, I needed to dry sand up to 600 grit and then wet sand up to 4000 grit. And finally, I could fit the axe head in permanently. I cut some wedges on the bandsaw and I cut a slot in the middle of the handle, and I hang the axe head in and add some glue and hammer in the wedges in. You can see the top kind of mushroom, which is a good sign, and then I could cut off all the excess material and clean it up. And once all the axes are fitted in, I give it a quick sand and finish it with a new finish that I haven't tried before. This is called the Walrus Oil Furniture Butter, and it's really easy wipe on, wipe off finish. I really do like the color it gives and the sheen, but I'm not really too sure how protective it would be. But I'm not too worried since this axe is meant to be a home decor and not for functional use. Let me know in the comments if you guys had any good experience with this finish. Okay, so here it is. An axe with a broken skateboard and epoxy handle. I got this Damascus axe head from Amazon, which looks amazing, so I'll leave a link in the description below. And if you're interested in these axes, make sure to check out my website, which is woby.design. And that's it for this video. If you haven't already, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and comment down below what I should make next with broken skateboards. Thanks again, and until next time, bye.